Welcome to Mana's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 16, The Half-Elf Godkin. The distance between them wasn't that great. If she had intended to hand it to him, it could have been accomplished by walking a few steps forward. In spite of that, she just silently placed the dish on the floor. Furthermore, since she first peeked her head in, they hadn't made eye contact once. Even Ainz understood why. She had no intention of talking to him. However, hostility, contempt, hatred, he couldn't feel any sort of negative emotions coming from her. Even when she set down the dish, she had a polite demeanor. It was more reasonable to think that she was just that type of woman, the type that wasn't good at talking with people. No, aside from that, I should consider the possibility of her being on guard. An adult, with the same level of power as Ainz has come to the village. Seeing that she doesn't know what my background is, it would be natural for her to be on guard, especially around the opposite sex. However, the reason why I brought souvenirs and have been acting this way was so I wouldn't be thought of like that. This is bad. I'm a little stumped about how to deal with this. He didn't know whether she had any children or not, but it would be troublesome if the women of this village, especially the mothers, started saying things like, "Don't hang around those twins," to their own children. There would be children who would ignore what their parents said, but there would also be kids who would listen to them. Ainz, brooding, gave up on immediately finding an answer to this problem. Ultimately, if I don't know this woman's normal disposition, then no matter how many assumptions I make about what sentiments are bearing behind her actions was supposed to convey, I would never arrive at an answer. She set down the dish she was carrying, bowed, and left the elf tree. Of course, Ainz also lowered his head with the same timing. Staring at the space where no one was, Ainz let out a sigh. He didn't ask her. He couldn't directly ask her what was with that attitude. Be that as it may, even if he hadn't asked that sort of question, there were things besides that he wanted to ask and talk to her about. However, how should he put it? Because he had felt that there was a clear wall between them, he hesitated. It wouldn't be so bad to have the expectation that, while she might have had that kind of attitude, the next person he met might display a far more different attitude. There was no doubt in his mind that that would provide better results than forcing a conversation on a person who had put up a wall around themselves. That was what Ainz thought, but looking at the dish of food the dark elf woman had set down, he remembered his time as Suzuki Sator. No. If it's right now, then it's not too late. Rather than letting this fester into a problem later, I should take care of it right now. It was the same way in a company. Rather than having a mistake be discovered later, the damage would be minimized if the mistake was immediately reported to one's boss. Because even if you yourself thought it was a big mistake, there were times when it would turn out not to be that big of a mistake after all. However, the damage could become much worse the more time were to pass. That's right. There were a few things he should talk to the dark elves about, sooner than later. Ainz frantically rushed out of the elf tree. He caught sight of the back of the dark elf woman right away. Since the dark elves, and elves too for that matter, had a far better sense of hearing than humans did, she probably heard the sound of Ainz rushing out of the elf tree, as she was already turning around. Was it because of his timing in calling out to her? She was quite surprised, that fact betrayed by her voice. "So, about the welcome party. Please talk to the elders about that," she answered, speaking rather quickly, to cover it up. It was an attitude that made you suspect that she was hiding something that she didn't want to say. The first thought that suddenly popped into his head was it was supposed to be a surprise. Or rather, that was the only thing that occurred to him. Of course, a surprise welcome party seemed a little strange, but it might have been a dark elf custom, so he should make it a special point to ignore it. Is that so? I do not know what you call it in this village, but right now I am in Kyaukazan of the Morning Moon. The Kyaukazan of the Morning Moon, is it? Yes, do you know of it? Of course, it was a ritual and name he had made up. His expectation that she couldn't have known about it was betrayed by the following words. No, that's right. That, somewhere, right. I have a feeling that I might have heard that word somewhere else before, or maybe I haven't. What? Ainz panicked. Could there have possibly been some similar word in this village? It would be bad if that were the case. The worst case scenario would be if it was the name of some evil ritual. He didn't know how to gloss it over. However, since the words morning moon by themselves also held the meaning of the month of the date of a loved one's death, that meaning should have been transmitted to her. Even if the word Kyaukazan, a word coined by Ainz, resembled something in the dark elf vernacular, he should still have any number of excuses he could use. Incidentally, the reason Ainz knew the words morning moon wasn't because he learned them at the company he worked for, but because it was the name of a skill in Yggdrasil. Wondering what it meant, he had looked it up. Well, was that right? No. No, that's right, isn't it? We're all dark elves, aren't we? By some chance we might have the same sort of words, right? Although you won't know if the meanings are the same unless you try asking. But that certainly is right, isn't it? And besides that, though I might seem to recall that I've heard it before, I cannot say for certain that they are the same Kyakuzen. While Ainz and the woman were both speaking back and forth quickly, they each showed a smile like their faces were being pulled taut. Of course, since Ainz's face was an illusion, his expression hardly shifted at all. Since this month is the time for me to pray for the tranquility of the dead, I would like to avoid going to places that are too cheerful, like a party, for the time being. Of course, because I imagine that this village has rules of its own, if you absolutely insist, I will participate. However, I would like for you to disregard any food and drink for myself. Yes, it is the month you pray for the tranquility of the dead, isn't it? So you are not eating or drinking. I understand. Well, thinking yes, she got it. He shook his head up and down. I would like to talk about this with the elders, but would you mind telling me which way I should go? If that is the case, then I will relay it to the elders. Wow. That's so, thank you very much. Well then, thank you for being so understanding. Ainz didn't say things like, when we were talking earlier, it felt like you were telling me to go tell them myself. He didn't check with her either because her proposal was convenient for him. He was just going to take her word for it. All that was left was for him to get the hell out of there before she said she had changed her mind, or that she wasn't going to do it after all. Ainz abruptly announced his farewell to the woman, who was flustered by Ainz's sudden and forceful urging. Then he walked back to the elf tree. While feeling relieved that she hadn't called out for him to stop, he had ignored her as hard as he could. Ainz returned to their lone dwelling, and picked up the trays she had placed on the floor. It weighed quite a bit, though from Ainz's perspective it was still pretty light. It didn't look like an amount of food the three of them could finish eating. This was, without a doubt, the morning and evening meals, 2 meals for 3 people, a total of 6 servings. When he considered that, it seemed natural for there to be this much, but he also had a hunch that this was still a little too much. That said, this was because Suzuki Satoru had never put that much effort into his meals. In addition, ever since he became Ainz, he's had a body that couldn't eat. So this might just be a lot of food based on his intuition. Maybe you have to take in a lot of calories when you're living in a place like this. There's no such thing as a totally nutritionally balanced diet anyway. Their meal consisted of cooked meat, which appeared to have been only roasted, grilled, and dried fruit. It was garnished with what looked like a salad of some kind of chopped leaves. In the salad, there were what appeared to be crushed caterpillars and a variety of tree nuts to go along with it. Incidentally, there was also a dish of assorted roasted caterpillars, big ones and other bugs. Or his assessment of those was, it wasn't very good. Moreover, due to the lack of variation in the flavors and ingredients, it seemed like one would quickly get tired of it. Be that as it may, it had sparked his curiosity. What sort of flavors would spread out in his mouth? Since insects were packed with protein, Suzuki Satoru used to eat the barbecue-flavored ones often. However, he had never eaten these kinds of fat, whole roasted caterpillars before. While thinking it was a little unfortunate that his body couldn't eat, Ainz placed the dish on a shelf in the room downstairs. Finally, he started to think about what he should do from here. Since the Dark Elves don't have the concept of lunch, the children's playtime should go on for a while probably. If the children were counted as part of the workforce, their playtime might be controlled to a certain degree, but there were many people who knew Ainz had thrown a word or two at the children about his wish for them to play with the twins. Given that was the case, the adults would probably allow the children to play full-time, at least for today. In other words, there was a good chance that neither Ora nor Mare would return anytime soon. In that case, Ainz decided that he would use the time to pursue his own interests. Even if he had used perfect unknowable and walked well, flown around the village, he had never shown himself in public and strolled around before. He might even discover something new. The last reason was that there were some places that he thought he would like to visit. And I've made some preparations, just in case. Unlike the memo pad he had been looking at just a while ago, this time he produced a proper notebook out of thin air from his item inventory and made it a point to try and memorize the various things he had written in it. What had been recorded in it was the production method of a potion that used various medicinal herbs and minerals. Unfortunately, with Ainz's brain, he could only remember 2 or 3 kinds of concoctions at best. However, while Ainz's brain certainly wasn't anything outstanding, you couldn't say it was the cause of all of his problems. It was because the mixing process was fairly detailed, though that would obviously be the case, and it was also rather difficult to memorize them for a person who completely lacked basic knowledge of, and interest in, the production of the aforementioned concoctions. While Ainz mumbled and recited the mixing process over and over again, he stowed away the notebook in his inventory, went outside a second time, and started walking around town. A number of dark elves recognized Ainz and glanced his way. It wasn't as if he was being watched. What resided in the glances of the people who normally walked around the village were curiosity and interest. While it would be dangerous if one person could see through his illusion, there was fortunately no sign that a person who possessed such an ability was present in this village. No, if there had been, then there would have been a huge uproar when they arrived at the village. Though there were villagers who were curious and showed interest, no one came up to talk to him. In this kind of isolated village, they would probably keep their distance from outsiders, as one would expect. No, even Ainz, no, even Suzuki Satoru wouldn't try to approach and talk to some unfamiliar face, just because they were in the company offices. On the contrary, if anyone did approach and talk to him, it might be logical to think they suspected him of something. In the first place, Ainz didn't feel he was being alienated.